welcome back to A Better World. This is your host, Mitchell J. Rabin, and we're very glad that you're joining us again today. Today we're going to have another very interesting show. We are seated with the author of this book, Tomorrow's Children, Riane Eisler, who is also an international best-selling author of the book Chalice and the Blade, which has been translated into 17 languages and is quite exceptional and has been hailed by many as an exceptional and many very important book for today's age. We're going to be speaking with Riane about education and the partnership model which she has helped to evolve and the importance of it, the implications of it for today's society and future generations. So Riane, thanks so much for being on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Great to have you. This is obviously born out of a lifetime of work and commitment to the health and well-being and education of children and later, of course, adults. Could you describe a little bit about this particular model that you've come up with, which is a wonderful and much needed change from our current system that you refer to as the dominator model?
Well, I wrote Tomorrow's Children out of a passionate commitment to help us develop the kind of education that young people need to meet the enormous challenges that they face. I mean,
so complex these days.
Well, I mean, personal and ethical challenges, environmental and economic challenges, social and technological challenges. And our education today, if you look at the discussion about education, it's focused on testing, it's focused on standards, but it's a very, very old model,
Yes, indeed.
That in terms of the work that I've done over the last 3 decades, which is really looking at cultural evolution, at 30,000 years of cultural evolution,
yes,
derives from earlier times that oriented more to what I call a dominator than a partnership model.
Yes.
And that's just not adaptive for young people. I mean, if you look at television or listen to the politicians, it's like, well, education is a conveyor belt. You know, you sort of move students from class to class and from grade to grade.
It's like a product or service of some sort.
Yeah, it's something
more like a product.
Something that we do to students rather than with students, even though we know that for real learning, you've got to get the student engaged.
It's interactive.
It's interactive. So that's one aspect of partnership education.
Mm-hmm.
But partnership education is really a new framework. We don't want to discard everything. There are some wonderful strong partnership elements already in education. Many educators, dedicated people have worked for this, but they exist today mostly as add-ons. And add-ons fall off, or they can be pushed out in times of regression, and we're seeing that today.
Let's just go back, if you would, and define the term dominator. I actually first heard this term, not from you, but from Terence McKenna, who I had on the show some years ago, and he used this idea of dominator, and that just hit me, and I went, well, of course. It was so intuitively obvious, and yet you're the one who really, in a sense, called it for what it is. Could you define that, and then in comparison and contrast, the partnership model?
Certainly. Well, many people, Terence included, have found it, if we don't have a name for a lot of the things that we intuit, it's very difficult to really do the transformative work.
Exactly.
The dominator model actually doesn't only describe a way of relating. That's obvious, isn't it? I mean, you know, somebody rankings.
Well, there's hierarchy.
Well, but it's a certain kind of hierarchy, because the partnership model has hierarchy. But it's a different hierarchy. In the dominator model, you have a hierarchy of domination. Power is used to control, to disempower. In the partnership model, you
and oftentimes use of violence is employed.
Well, of course. Because how else can you maintain rigid rankings, be it man over woman, man over man, nation over nation, race over race? Ultimately, it has to be backed up by fear, doesn't it? By fear and force is what
intimidation.
Maintains it, precisely. In the partnership model, the primary principle is really linking. In other words, mutual and respectful, mutually respectful relationships. But as I said, it's not a flat. I mean, this is a mistake. Flat organizations, flat ways of structuring become laissez-faire. And they really become a very quick road to the dominator model, because we need structure.
Yes, indeed.
The structure of the partnership model has what I call hierarchies of actualization. We hear about it today in the corporate area, even in the school system, where the leader or the teacher facilitates, is a mentor, empowers rather than disempowers. And education, educare, really means to elicit from.
Right. To draw from, to lead out of.
And of course, if we had picked the absolutely worst system to teach kids for the post-industrial society, never mind for being a human,
yes,
it would be what's happening today, which is a regression to the dominator model. Because what do you need for the post-industrial economy? You need people who are flexible, who are creative, who know how to work in teams rather
adaptive. Teamwork, as you say.
Teamwork rather than just giving or taking orders, and self-directed. And the testing now is, again, we're going to rank people, we're going to humiliate those on bottom, publish the results in the newspaper, but it's also a way of getting rid of very important add-ons, multiculturalism, environmental education, gender balance, because we're forcing the teachers again to just focus on rote memorization, rote learning, test, test, test. So rather than just being reactive and saying this is bad, we need something that's proactive. And partnership education provides that framework. It integrates process, how we learn and teach, content, what we learn and teach,
sure,
and structure, the learning environment. Right.
Exactly. What do you say about where? Maybe we'll go in inverse order.
I've already told you a little about the where. I mean, let me give you an example.
Sure.
Some of the schools that we've worked with, for example, the Nova High School. It's a public high school in Seattle, Washington. The kids in that high school sit on the committees that hire and fire teachers. Okay, it's their education. It's not the only voice, mind you. But they have a voice. They have a voice in setting the rules for the school. That is a completely violence-free school.
Interesting.
Well, of course, because if you are connected to your school, if you have a stake, if we want democracy, we've got to make it possible for kids to experience it. And that old dominator model, which is so top-down, is hardly education for democracy.
It's squashing. It's repressive, ultimately.
Precisely. So it creates really a very different, they call it cultural climate.
So this is being applied.
Yes, of course.
At this particular school.
And at many schools, bits
with
and pieces.
Very notable results.
Absolutely. And if you look around, you can really see bits and pieces of partnership process, structure, and content. But what's needed is a framework, because otherwise we're going to keep seeing regressions.
Well, it comes down, Riane, to something very important and something that is always puzzling me. I'm always looking at it, which is what is the human impetus? And as a sociologist and someone who's been studying human beings in culture for so long, I would be interested to hear what you have to say about this. Violence and the tendency toward aggression is really, you could say, our Achilles heel, because it's that supports the dominator model. It's this feeling of whether it's fear or whether it's genetic, and I'd like to hear what you have to say about that, that has us want to be on top of instead of underneath, if you will. What do you feel in all your studies is the basis of the tendency toward aggression?
Well, everything we humans do is based in our biology, okay?
Definitely.
The issue is really where we put the emphasis in the social structure. What kind of behaviors do we model? What kind of behaviors do we teach kids are appropriate for, quote, real masculinity, real femininity? What do we idealize? I mean, let me just give you an example of partnership content. Two of them I'd like to. The first one really would deal with biological evolution. If we use the partnership content approach of alternatives that balance the old narratives, because the old narratives, the way that it's taught, evolution, the focus is on precisely aggression, violence, pure selfishness. Now that's part of the human...
Self-aggrandizement.
Part of the human behavioral repertoire, but it leaves out a huge part of the human behavioral repertoire, And partnership education restores that. So young people would learn, for example, about the new scholarship that shows the importance of cooperation, not just this fierce competition in evolution. But they'd learn much more than that. They would learn about the importance of mother-child bonds in the evolution of love. It's very, very interesting. You look at the textbooks, you look at the museum dioramas, and it's like, oh, there weren't any women. Or maybe they were just always sitting there, like...
Docilely.
Docilely, but in truth, the evolution of love is a huge part of human biology. What do we want? We want love.
Definitely.
We want to receive it, but we also want to give it.
That's right.
Young people need to know that by the grace of evolution, we humans receive biochemical rewards, neuropeptides, of enormous pleasure, not only when we are loved and cared for, but when we love and care for another, be it a child, a friend, a lover, even a pet. We experience this, but it is absent from what is presented as important. So we need to really have a much more balanced narrative. But the narrative, of course, isn't enough, because we're ultimately talking about young people who then see the reality, the viability, and the advantages of a social structure. It's a continuum that orients more to the partnership model. The partnership curriculum doesn't idealize male violence. Think about it. We tell kids, particularly boys, because it's the boys who are today gunning down their classmates, but there's a reason for that. We tell kids, don't be violent. But then what are the dates they have to memorize?
Dates of when wars began and ended.
Absolutely. So
ours is military history.
So what are we really telling kids? The way you get into history, go kill somebody. That's heroic, that's manly, and very little attention is given to the non-violently achieved social reforms to which you and I and all of us owe just about everything good in our lives, from labor reform, family planning, the abolition of child labor. The list, we need to have balance. The issue is, what do we emphasize? If we have a partnership curriculum, kids still learn about the dominator side of history, but they get the balance. They still learn about the dominator possibility of human biology, but they also learn the truth, which is that the dominator model really is even a miserable model for those on top. Why do we have so many...
Very true.
Why do we
That's an important point.
It's a very important point, because they're always tense.
Oh, yeah.
All those stories...
They're not happy. And they are depriving themselves of the two main components of life that you're referring to, love and happiness.
Well, it's, all these stories that we have about the older men killing their sons because they're afraid that their sons are going to take over.
Story.
That's a dominator mythology. It's not a human mythology. It comes out of a system where those on top have to always be tense, because there's somebody out there, some other... So it's, and besides,
we could look at how Freud has helped to contribute and support that model, but that's another conversation.
Well, actually, it's an interesting thing, because Freud did a brilliant analysis of the male dominator psyche, and then it got peddled by him as the human psyche.
Yes.
And the social construction of behavior that postmodern scholarship so highlights is totally absent from this.
Yes.
So we don't see our alternatives.
So are you suggesting, Riane, that while, of course, and I agree with you completely, and it can't be anything otherwise, that our lives, of course, are based on our biological structure, and yet within that, there needs to be proper education, proper psychology, understanding of how to mediate and work with that biology?
Absolutely. For example, one of the very important elements in partnership is caring for life. It's a thread that runs through.
Yes,
caring for self, for others, and for our Mother Earth. It's all part of the same package.
Sure.
And yes, a very important thing there is that rather, we hear so much about character education, but we have to distinguish, I think, between dominator character education, which relies a lot on fear of punishment. If we want kids to really, out of intrinsic motivations, because of the pleasure that we humans get of being caring, because of their pride in their relational skills, we have to help them with those skills. And parenting education is, again, an essential element of partnership education. We know that one of the ways that the dominator system perpetuates itself is through abusive and violent parenting. We also know that the neural networks of the brain are affected by the quality of parenting. We owe it to young people to give them the wherewithal to help break these cycles of violence.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the other things that you are suggesting, and it's just so true, is that the idols that we have in our society must be knocked down. I mean, it calls for iconoclasm, because if you look at one of the major influences happens to be television, which is why we're so committed to making television something positive. Children are watching violence perpetuated primarily by men who then win the woman.
That's right.
After their violent acts. So then violence and sex become interlinked in the minds of children in this outrageous web. And how do you begin to disentangle that?
Well,
and these are the heroes. I mean, these are the James Bonds, if you will, etc., that people look up to.
First of all, this is also our heritage. It's very ancient. Look at
Very
the New
true.
Age, for example.
Oh, it's mythical.
Look at the Iron John story. I mean, what is it? The story is, you kill, the guy kills, and then he gets to mate.
Yes.
Same story, but it's now packaged in New Age clothes as a wonderful story. It's really the same terrible story.
Yes.
So I think the first thing that we do is we offer young people and all of us the analytical lens partnership dominator continuum. Media literacy skills informed by the partnership dominator continuum as an analytical lens are so powerful. I have seen the stories that kids then write, and they identify what really am I being taught, not only by television, which I agree with you, is really teaching mostly dominator behaviors, but even in the curriculum and even in many of our classics. So it's a question of unraveling, reweaving. We still teach some of these classics, but we help young people contextualize this.
Exactly. Get perspective.
Yes, get perspective, and then talk about, well, which of these models, I mean, how do you feel in your body? How do you feel?
Exactly. As therapists, this is what we do. We teach people, we train them to pay attention to their bodies.
Yeah.
Because we have become so intellectually minded and literally alienated, lifted out of our bodies. People don't know what they feel anymore.
Well, that's one of the problems.
Well, one of the other things that's kind of floating up to the surface here in what you're speaking about, especially kind of suggesting historically, is that by balancing things out, you said before, what happened to women in human history? Well, or as I noticed in the book, reference to Black history as well,
of
or
course.
Minority history. It's virtually obliterated from our normal textbooks. One wouldn't know that there was any history.
And if it's just Women's History Month, or if it's just Fiesta de Cinco de Mayo, or just Martin Luther King Day,
Right.
Kids get it, If it's something that we ignore the rest of the year, it's not important. So in a partnership curriculum, again, we're talking content, because we learn from stories. In a literature class, kids, for example, might learn that the first novel was written by a Japanese woman 1,000 years ago, The Tales of Genji, and are still, classics. So this really is a whole new way
of regarding human history.
Human history, and it's much more interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's not the same old, same old.
Exactly.
Not to speak of being the kind of we need for the diversity that we have.
Well, I think maybe on something like Martin Luther King Day, the window is open and it can never be closed again. Because those young black children see, for instance, something of their forefathers. I'm talking about inventors of the light bulb that was working close to Thomas Edison. But because they were black, they weren't going to get anywhere. But the inventions were running parallel with all of the so-called great white man's inventions. But they were originated by the black man.
Well, the thing about it is this. We have to have a presence. And a curriculum really reflects a society's values. What do we value? What don't we value? Mm-hmm. And the omission of women is very serious for the values. Because consider that women have been stereotypically associated precisely with the values that we so urgently need at this time. Yeah. Nonviolence, caregiving, empathy. I mean, these are stereotypes. Some women are very unempathic,
That's right.
Some men are.
But we say that it's connected, at least associated with the feminine principle.
And because our society, our heritage from the dominator model is, the ranking of man over woman, these values, along with women, are devalued.
That's right.
So only by bringing in a more balanced curriculum can we also change the values.
That's right. Absolutely. And your work is obviously highlighting this and what we're talking about is a restoration of normal human, not only decency, but the balance between the male and the female and the characteristics that are associated with both. And there's something wonderful about strength, and there's something wonderful about softness.
Well, and some men are very soft, and some women are very strong.
Very true.
My voice is having trouble here, but we're okay. So I think as we move also to a more balanced way of looking at both halves of humanity, we can also leave these gender stereotypes behind. Because, when you access your, quote, feminine, you're not accessing your feminine. You're accessing a part of you. And when I access my assertiveness or my logic, I'm asserting me, not my masculine.
It's a way of talking.
It's important that we recognize these associations, but I think down the road, I think we really need to get rid of this notion that there's an essential masculine and an essential feminine. There's a human.
Yes, just what I was going to say. There's an essential human, though.
Yeah, there is very
definitely true.
An essential human.
That's right. Definitely.
Partnership education is really about giving young people not only the opportunity to experience partnership in action, but also to give them a much more complete, more accurate, and yes, more hopeful picture of what being human means.
Now, this work that you've done, which is so fabulous and so hearty, if you will, and not just heart-oriented, it's very holistic. How is it taking root as you go out meeting people in the world? You've got the Partnership Center. What is happening as you introduce this for implementation?
Well, the Center for Partnership Studies, which is headquartered in Tucson in Arizona, but really has branches in the sense of people who are working with us, partnership education consultants, all over the country and increasingly also internationally. I spoke recently at a conference for 4,000 Latin American educators in Argentina. There's a tremendous hunger for this. And the Center for Partnership Studies has developed our partnership education program. We offer materials, not only, of course, Tomorrow's Children, which is so rich in materials, but a new book which will be out, it's coming out momentarily, actually, called Partnership Education in Action, written by two of our partnership education, edited by two of our partnership education consultants with lesson plans for homeschooling, for classrooms.
A whole curriculum.
Whole curriculum. Also, I've just finished a video with the Media Education Foundation on partnership education, which is available. So one thing is resources, but the other thing is workshops, trainings, consulting for schools.
But you're finding that principals, educators, and others are really responding favorably.
Well, they're very interested. The issue for all of them right now in this time of regression is how do you open the way for this? But that will only happen if enough people, parents, people in the community, start saying, this is not the education that my child needs.
Yes.
To know how to take a test. I mean, you and I know we crammed for tests and we don't remember a
Sure.
thing. We don't
It's
get
all short-term memory. It's
we
not
don't get lifelong learners.
exactly
We don't get people who know how to live. So
the
as
understanding of principles.
that's right. So as more of us at PTA meetings talk to principals, talk to supervisors, talk to school boards, we have tools.
Sure.
Tomorrow's Children is such a tool. The other
Definitely.
books are such a tool. Our partnership consultants are people who can come in and help a school.
Sure, sure. It would seem to me that schools like Columbine High School would be particularly interested in listening to your message. Have you approached those schools in particular that had violent scenes?
We really haven't. Of course.
It's just occurring to me because that's sort
Yes.
of like the expression of sort of the lowest of the dominator regressive model.
That's right. Well,
And,
certainly the partnership model is a much better antidote to violence than metal detectors.
Oh my word.
I mean,
my
you know,
word.
the approach is always so short-sighted and so superficial rather than going to the root causes, to what kind of
course.
education are we giving young people. I mean, some of these videos that these, you know, I mean, these video games,
Oh.
they're really hands-on teaching
Oh,
of brutality.
exactly. How to operate weaponry.
Yeah.
Really? Oh yeah, it's utterly frightening.
So,
but as
and if
long
they don't
as
get an alternative view, I mean,
Sure.
that's the whole issue here. So the schools
That's
have a
right.
tremendous responsibility today to
More
give
than
young
ever.
people, more than ever,
yeah.
more than ever, to
I
give
mean,
young
what
people
you're
that
speaking about,
alternative.
Riane, so much is kind of organically sensible. And I think many of your readers and colleagues have realized this, have come up with similar ideas because it follows the laws of nature. It really does.
Well, much of the good work done by educators really does fit into the integrative framework of partnership education.
Indeed.
But there are a lot of innovative elements also in it.
I've
and
noticed.
we have to move forward.
Exactly.
We have to have that
Vision
integrative
and commitment.
vision and
Right.
commitment.
Yeah.
And not to give up and not to get discouraged.
Exactly.
Because especially in times of regression, that's when you really have to keep your
That's
eye
right. On the ball.
a larger
That's right.
plan.
Really true. Well, Riane, it's really been a pleasure to speak with you and hear more about the work you're doing and not only its theory, but also its application in the world. And I just want to thank you and commend you on the work that you're doing and pray that you keep going as you are.
It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Good. This is Mitchell J. Rabin for A Better World. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. These ideas are underlying principles that are of such importance to us all in generating and creating the kind of world we most want, which of course is what this show is really all about. So thanks so much for listening and being part of this with us. This is Mitchell J. Rabin for A Better World, and we look forward to seeing you all next week.